Well, it's interesting how certain groups can go and have rulings. For instance, recently, when Judge Michelson of the U.S. District Court ruled that the Detroit police cannot use excessive force to deter protesters. So they have
Well,
their
it's a
protection.
little more. It's a little more. She did make a ruling, but the most significant part is that only if we had to.
Well, but you typically in
Right.
your department under your leadership, the police officers only used force when the protesters weren't peaceful.
Exactly. And I stand by it. And so,
But so if groups like that can get protected, and rightfully so, why can't law enforcement who serve every day?
well, and that's a great point. And make no mistake, this conversation about stripping away qualified immunity from police officers is a veiled strategic effort to dismantle policing as we know it. So some have kind of backed a little bit off of this whole defund. They recognize that defund hasn't worked out very well. And so that's coming from the far, far left progressives that continue to drive it. And the more moderate Democrats are taking well, we don't necessarily agree with defund, but you're still talking about ending qualified immunity. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're supporting ending qualified immunity, what do you think is going to happen? Let's ask New York. New York City Council voted to end qualified immunity. Look at what's happening in New York right now. Right. 75% increase in officers leaving, retiring, resigning. Who would want to do this work if you're not protected? And then what other impact does it have? So if a police officer decides to stay, they do as little as possible. Mm-hmm. Because you can be sued virtually for anything. You might go and administer a life-saving effort to a child, and the child may succumb to whatever injury or illness, and the officer did the very best, and now the officer gets sued. So now this officer is what? It has no protection. Mm-hmm. And as it stands right now, what they conveniently leave out of the conversation, if an officer engages in criminal misconduct, say excessive force, violating someone's constitutional rights, they're not going to be indemnified anyway. I mean, it's just not. And so, and if your premise or the crafters of this, if their whole idea is to hold police officers accountable, I get that, but that's not how you do it. Right. There's already a provision in place. If an officer goes out and gets involved in a shooting, and a shooting is deemed to be out of policy, deemed to be criminal, do you think Chauvin was given immunity? And so that's what conveniently gets left out of the conversation.
Well, don't you think, Chief, that a lot of this has to do with education, not just within the Detroit or any law enforcement agencies, educating their staff and continuing the education and making sure their tolerance for, some of the acceptance of this bad behavior is not, grown over time. They say that the more they're involved in something, or the more you continue to do something, your tolerance level for it grows. But that's, becoming aware and educated, but it's also educating the public. So
absolutely,
as a leader, to bring these two divided sides together, like you said, instead of standing mute or, not saying anything at all, or just going with the program, you have to get involved. You have to speak out. You have to educate. Knowledge is empowerment. And in order to bring people of, any side of any issue together.
Right.
Or just like you said, common ground, or just some rational, reasonable way
Right.
It's about educating and empowering. And didn't you do that within your own department?
Absolutely.